And we are live. Welcome, everyone. This is Dan with our Friday Expert live stream. I have Jocelyn Murray with us. I'm super excited. Look, if you right now say, I'm a good storyteller, I'm good at telling my nonprofit story, but when I sit down in front of a piece of paper or I sit down in front of an email, I don't know how to make sure that the passion that I communicate in my voice when I'm talking to somebody actually comes through on the page, or actually comes through in that email. If that's you, this live stream is for you. I'm excited to have Jocelyn Murray. She is the owner of Marketing ER, which I'm sure she'll talk about when we bring her on here. And I am thrilled to have her on here to talk about storytelling in the written form. Welcome to the Friday Expert live stream. Jocelyn, what got you involved in this crazy world of nonprofits?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Dan. Well, I've had a small marketing agency, boutique agency for over 20 years. And I'd say probably about 10 years ago, I got introduced to the executive director of a homeless shelter. And she desperately needed help with her communications, her donor fundraising, her visibility in the community. And we just got along great, and she was referred by like a common vendor, and that was my entree into the world of nonprofits. So ever since then, helping organizations that really do great mission driven work is just very rewarding. And I'd say over the past 10 plus years, I've kind of gained an expertise in helping these organizations to spread their message, drive change, increase awareness, and ways to bring in more donations to help their agencies.
So, what is different about nonprofit communications versus for-profit communications, since you do both? And we have a lot of people who watch the stream, who pay attention to us, who have either a for-profit and a nonprofit, or they familiar with for-profits and not as much nonprofits. What is different about nonprofit communication?
Yeah, I'd say again, nonprofits, have a very, specific mission-driven, premise to what they're doing. A lot of their causes, really drive change and are really helping people. So it's just all about pulling at the heartstrings and really making sure their audiences understand all that they do to help the cause that they're in charge of. So for profit, I do a lot of work for profit, but the nonprofit is just a whole different ball game. And fundraising is a big part of it, and so that's where I come in and help them with their fundraising strategies. So that's the difference. The fundraising element is really the big difference.
Okay. So, what are some of the challenges that you find that nonprofits have in communicating their story and communicating emotionally through direct mail, through email? What are some of the most common challenges that nonprofits have?
I've worked with a lot of nonprofits. I think a lot of times you need to understand all your audiences. You've got your donors, your constituents, your volunteers, you've got the general public. So really understand who all the different audiences are for your nonprofit organization. What are the different messages and the different marketing methods that you're going to use to foster relationships with all of those audiences? That can be challenging. That can be challenging. So, there's a lot to consider, and a lot to organize and put together when you're facing all the different constituents and the different messaging.
Something that comes up with written storytelling a lot with my clients is they struggle to identify which audience should they focus on, and how do they focus on one audience without alienating the other audiences, right? So, for example, like a communication tool like a website, everybody's hitting that website. Everybody is engaging with that website. How do you identify who is the target audience, and how do you make sure that in narrowing for the target audience, you're not excluding the other people who might come across that or read that?
Yeah, I don't think we're worry too much about excluding others, but I think when it comes to storytelling, we're typically talking to the donor.
Mhm.
I think the message is to really make the donors understand um, what the organization's doing, how they're helping, the results that are happening as a result of their services. Um, so I think that when it comes to donors, the messaging is usually focused on telling the stories. But a lot of times, maybe you have like a great volunteer story that would be a great way to attract other volunteers. So I think storytelling can come into all of those messaging for all those different audiences. But again, I see it mostly with donors, sometimes with volunteers, but again, even sometimes for general public relations work, to make the general public, better understand what you're doing in the community for their community. It's great to have like testimonials, or great to have some kind of story as part of the PR pitch, the PR angle. So I don't think you're really going to be excluding anybody, but I think it's good to kind of think about the different types of stories you're telling and how you're going to be including them for the different audiences.
But even within donors, right? So donors have different motivations for why they support an organization. You could have a disaster relief organization where some donors are supporting that organization because of its work, saving people directly from disasters, and some organizations supporting that work because of the rebuild after that disaster. How do you determine which of these motivations to target in your actual outreach, particularly if you're a medium-sized nonprofit that can't just be like throwing out letters to everybody under the sun because you feel like it and want to test?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that can be a challenge. That can be challenging. I think it goes into, really having a strategy. You kind of need to know what your strategy is, and, um, maybe the strategy is to, communicate a certain way to a certain type of donor. And again, maybe it's, really good donor segmentation, that you know who the new donors are, who your tried and true donors are, or maybe a donor is tagged because they came in as a result of, like you said, something specific that happened. So donor segmentation is really important, and then maybe tailoring your messaging, based on how they became the donors, or how long they've been donors, or what's inspired them to be a donor. Organizations, a lot of small organizations just don't really have the wherewithal to do all that really fine segmentation. So that can be tough when you're just starting out. But clearly, the larger nonprofits, they have the ability to really manipulate and segment their audiences that way.
Okay. Okay. So let's say we do know who our audience is, and now we're actually going to write this letter. Um, I know so many people who struggle to put a story into written form, because it's either they're concerned it's too long, it's too complicated, it weaves this way and that. How does a nonprofit, just in general, approach writing a letter that actually communicates a story to that donor? What are some of the things that they should keep in mind?
Well, I think before you're actually writing the fundraising piece, kind of goes back to, kind of creating the story itself,
Mm,
and so I think you have to kind of think about, what kind of stories you're going to be sharing, and how are you going to get a lot of nonprofits are just like, they don't know where to start. Um, and usually I recommend, start by asking your staff members. Can they share stories of, clients, the people that they've been interacting with? Maybe you have like client feedback forms where you get like testimonial quotes or something from clients, and you say, oh, that really is touching. That really would, you
mm,
know, make a good testimonial, a great story. Um, yeah, I have a nonprofit client that does exit interviews with their clients, the people that they help. And a lot of times those exit forms, we can take the information from those exit forms and say, yeah, that person really has a great story. Maybe we can go to them. So I
mm,
think right now, I think to start, you want to think about who can you speak to, who's going to bring the most powerful message about what you've done for them or how you've helped them? Who's going to bring the most powerful message? And then you're starting to gather the stories from as many different types of people associated with your organization as possible. And then, so you're going to start to, kind of gather that information. So yeah, and I think, it takes a little bit of effort to kind of get that whole collection process going. And I think a lot of people are intimidated by, where do I start and how does that work? And, kind of what are the basics of pulling that information together?
Well, and what kind of stories are you primarily looking for? Like, what are the features of a good story? So let's say somebody being able to talk to people who've been impacted by the nonprofit, even if it's not a formal process like an impact exit interview or something like that. Lots of people, when they're doing their nonprofit, they talk to their clients after. Like, that's how they get their good feelings about continuing to do the nonprofit, is they talk to their clients afterward. But how does someone identify that is a really potentially good story, and that's probably not what we want?
I think a lot of times it might kind of come down to emotions. And I think maybe one of the biggest flaws in nonprofit storytelling is the lack of emotion. So I think, which might be ironic given that donors and the constituents are really engaging in organizations fundamentally in like an emotional way. But I think you first have to focus on find the emotional core of your mission, and then can you connect people to it? So I think it's really, important. I think people sometimes know at an intellectual level what you do and how you do it, but the emotional appeal can really win over, more donors, and, really appeal to them. I think I've read that, or I have a statistic that I think storytelling donors are twice as likely to donate to a nonprofit when presented with a really compelling emotional story, as opposed to just like a relevant statistic. So, so I think maybe thinking about the emotions of what you do and how you do it, and how that spurs on the emotions of your potential donor.
So let's say that I get a good emotional story, right? So I read it and I'm like, wow, that's powerful. How do I write it in a way that it actually communicates that emotion, instead of, like you talk about, putting the story together? Well, at all the client feedback forms I've ever seen, the stories are not neatly packaged, to put it that way. There's like pieces that are good and there's pieces that are like, whatever. How do I put it in a format that donors would actually listen to as a story?
Yeah, I think you need to maybe start with the end in mind. Think of what you want to end up with and maybe backtrack from there to draft your questions. So kind of get the story behind the story too. But sometimes it's just, in the course of the interview, you're really just going to listen and really just put out those open-ended questions and just take in as much as you can. But in the end, I think it comes down to getting, a good writer or a good professional copywriter who's going to put a good story together and knows how to convert it into a good donor communications tool, because there are definitely techniques that we use when we're putting together, donor solicitation letters. It's not like you're just writing it off the cuff. There's definitely strategy as to how you're writing that letter and the types of words you're using, and you're using the word "you" a lot, and there's a lot of strategy that goes into it. So sometimes that's where it comes into play of, maybe I do need to look at a professional to help me write that story and then incorporate it into a direct mail solicitation.
Well, and honestly, this kind of really made a light bulb click for me, because I know a lot of people struggle with their founding story and telling their founding story. And I have found that when they're more clear about what their nonprofit does, telling their founding story becomes a lot easier. Mm-hmm. And that's what you mean by begin with the end in mind. That if you're thinking of the story, where does that story end? How does it crescendo into a call to action? what does that look like? And then you design the story around the goal of that story.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. Yep.
That is amazing. Okay, so you have the story, you begin with the end in mind. Is there a particular structure you recommend for people to write their stories in once they do have the end? Do you use like a story brand, or do you use something, one of the storytelling frameworks that's out there? What do you like to utilize as a structure for putting this into a email or a letter?
Yeah, I don't know if I really can say that there's like a specific structure. I think I use a lot of testimonial quotes, so a lot of quotes from the person who's kind of the character, the main beneficiary of the service. Really using a lot of good testimonial quotes, so people really understand that this is coming directly from the person. Like I said, beginning with the end in mind, so really making sure the donor sees right off the bat, what were the powerful results that happened, from your services, from what your nonprofit does and how they help the organization. As far as like structure, I think it depends. Like on your website, you're going to have a lot of room for a very detailed explanation of the story, whereas in your direct mail solicitation, you're just going to have maybe pull in bits and pieces of that. So maybe it depends on the medium that where you're publishing the story, or how you're using the story. Your website, is it in social media, is it in your direct mail letter?
Got it.
It might change, but then it kind of goes back to starting out with those good bones and maybe having like somebody professionally writing that story for you, so that it makes it easy for you to pull it into all your different other marketing mediums.
Okay. So let's say that you do have a professional to write the story, but maybe you actually need to put the direct mail together. Your professional fell off a cliff into the Atlantic Ocean, and that is where you're at. So, or really, even from a larger nonprofit perspective, if you're going to know that something is done well, you have to have the basic idea of how it should be done. You may not be able to pull it off yourself, but in order to really evaluate whether that is an effective approach or method, do some idea of how it works. So if someone puts together their story and now they want to put it into an actual fundraising appeal, what are some of the things they should be thinking about as they go to write the appeal, before they actually stick the story in, or before they actually write it? What do they need to be preparing before they write that appeal?
I think it goes back to, is it a story that's going to be memorable? Is something that people are really going to remember? It's really going to touch them. Is it going to influence them in deciding to make a donation to you? Are they going to be able to come to conclusions about, how important your work is compared to maybe other stories they've heard or other appeals they've gotten? So you want to make it easy for them to decide to say, yes, we want to make a donation. You really want to maybe write to appeal to their sense of generosity. How can you really like pull at those heartstrings? So, it comes down to just, I think, some basic things like that, and putting yourself in the shoes of the donor. A lot of times, we want to talk about ourselves, but really when you write a story in a donor appeal, it's about the donor. That's why you use the word you throughout the whole donor appeal. It's the word of you. The word of you is used a lot because it's about them. It's not about you. It's about how you want them to react. You want them to understand. You want them to feel. So keep in mind that the donor appeal should be about the donor and not about you.
That is really good advice. Just swapping out you for I in your language.
Yeah.
Okay. So people get less mail now than they did. So it's not quite as competitive to get mail in your mailbox. But what people do get of mail is like trash. I mean, in the local the used car dealership is running a special for a Walmart gift card, and some spammer got your information, and now they've sold it to 15 different companies who want to sell you air conditioners, and et cetera, et cetera. Maybe there's some bills in the mail, opening the mail is not particularly fun. How do you ensure, or how do you get people to actually open your piece of mail and consider it important to them?
A lot of times you're going to be mailing to people who have expressed interest in your organization in some way. So hopefully they're going to recognize your name on the envelope and they're going to want to open it. So hopefully you've got some relationship with them that's going to kind of prompt them to want to understand or want to hear from you. I don't think we ever do any kind of direct mail solicitation without a teaser on the envelope. So a lot of times that is a really important element to, give people just a little peek at what maybe you're mailing them about, or something that's going to just appeal to them to open that envelope. So
what's a good teaser? What's if you think about putting together an envelope, you have your appeal, what do you put as the teaser?
It depends on the organization. We have, like I said, we have a lot of different, but sometimes it's it's time sensitive. So sometimes it's like related to maybe you're raising money to provide food for Thanksgiving dinner for for homeless people. So your teaser is going to be something related to help feed your neighbors Thanksgiving dinner. Help feed your neighbors Thanksgiving dinner for this Thanksgiving. So sometimes it can be timely, related to something, really like that'll pull out heartstrings, like the holidays. There's nonprofits that help children, and there's so many, ways you can include a teaser about, helping, how you can, you're helping local children. So sometimes like making sure they understand what you're doing, and maybe it's related to something really, timely, like holidays or something. So, but I'd say making sure your envelope includes who you are, your logo, your name, because hopefully you've got a relationship with them. And then, a good envelope teaser. But again, that's kind of weird. Like when you look to a professional to maybe help you come up with these things, so that they're tried and true, and they're gonna work.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So when you are putting this together and they do open it, standard letter, do you like to include a little trinket in there to get their attention? I know some nonprofits include gifts sometimes nonprofits include, how do you know what to include, what not to include in this? So what do you see working in the donor communication space right now?
Yeah, my recommendation is always, at the very least, to have a letter front and back. A lot of times it's letters that are just one page front, but letters you want, and sometimes people are really hesitant to write that front and back copy. They think it's too much, but it can never be too much. If it's written well, you want to include as much good copy as you can. And again, front and back letter has been proven to be more successful than just a letter with front copy only. A lot of times you'll see these direct mail pieces, they have a lot of inserts. So a lot of times you'll see a letter front and back, then maybe an additional supplemental, maybe it's like a newsletter, or maybe the additional piece is that story, that testimonial with a picture of, and maybe in a minute I'll talk about, visuals and how important those are to storytelling. And then you want your response mechanism. You want a QR code so that people can scan their phone and go right to your donation page from the letter. Or you should include a reply envelope, a remittance envelope, because if there are people that are still writing checks, believe it or not, and some people feel more secure writing a check, and you want them to be able to put it in the envelope and send it right to you. I can't tell you how many nonprofits I work for where their donors are still writing physical checks, and they feel more comfortable doing that. So you don't want to exclude that, and think that everybody wants to scan and donate online, because not everybody does. So you want the option of being able to do both. Yeah.
So we're at the midpoint, and so immediately after this midpoint, we can talk about the graphics on the letter and what to include, what not to include. I'm really looking forward to that part of our conversation. But this is the middle of the live stream. In the middle of the live stream, we always encourage our guests to give away a little bit of a freebie. Give something that shows your expertise. Give something that can really help the nonprofits who are listening in right now. So talk a little bit about what you got.
Yeah, for any nonprofit organizations that, this really is of interest to them, they can email me and get storytelling tips to attract donors. So I can give you my email address, or I'm just gonna put it in a chat, or, well, it's a live stream, so I guess I could just tell you. You can send an email to Jocelyn M, JOCELYNM, at marketing-er.com. And I will send you a tips list of storytelling tips to attract donors.
Well, and I'm not only going to throw that in the chat, but I'm also going to throw it up on a banner here so that somebody can very easily see that this is the email to send that and get those storytelling tips for donors. That is amazing, and super excited to have you do that. Yeah. So let's dive into graphics. Let's talk about graphics, talk about visuals, particularly if someone's not a graphic design person. What are some of the things that you found to be really effective in garnering that donor attention, getting donors to want to give when it comes to graphics and visuals?
Yeah, well, I think when it comes to telling your story, the visuals are really important. Pictures are worth, thousands worth of words. So, the pictures are going to inspire, they're going to maybe express things, immediately with a lot of emotion. So you really don't want to forget to use them in, on your website, in your social media, in your direct marketing appeals. A lot of times, these beautiful images can really just leave your donors or your potential donors feeling the impact or feeling, the positive effects that you've had. So I'd say, as many great images of the characters of your story, the main people in your story, is really important. But even, like I said before, if you're doing like stories, volunteer stories to attract more volunteers, it's a great way to highlight, kind of behind the scenes, to show the moments of your organization, behind the scenes of what you do, what the people behind the scenes are doing to really, be the heart and soul of the organization. So yeah, a lot of times, think about what can you really capture in an image, and how is that going to impact your storytelling. But then also, good graphic design is important. I mean, I think everyone knows that when it comes to your website, when it comes to your materials, and the same goes for your, including that story in your direct mail appeal. It's really important to have professional direct mail, a professional graphic design for your direct mail, to make sure that, because again, like we said, when we do things professionally, there's a lot of techniques that we use that, will help you get that letter read, get the donor to flip over to the back and scan the QR code. And so, professional, using great visuals and having professional design, I think is important.
So let's dig into one of those. So there's been a lot of a shift in the nonprofit world from this kind of poverty porn, is something I've heard it referred to a lot as, to something that is a lot more positively reflected of the people that you're serving. So nonprofits are moving from showing the harm, showing the pained look on somebody's face, showing the actual person in that situation, to a little bit more of a positive element. And there's been debate about this move in the nonprofit space. What are you seeing, or what would you suggest as the kinds of images that you should be including of your subjects, of the main characters of the story? Are they smiling? Are they angry? I mean, some of it has to do with the story itself, but like, where do you fall in this debate, and what do you see being effective with donors?
Yeah, I think that's tough. I think most of my experience has been not showing necessarily the pain and the hardship. I think usually the nonprofits that I've worked with, the story's going to tell, the entire, trials and tribulation of maybe what the individual went through and how the organization helped them. But usually we choose photos that really will grab the attention of the viewer, but they're typically human faces. And I think, the face is going to tell the story. It doesn't necessarily have to be a smiling face, but showing the faces of the individual, that's what's really going to attract people's attention. There's just something about the human face that, people can really, they can garner a lot from. So yeah, I think I'd have to say most of the organization I work with, they're not really showing hardship or showing the homeless person in the state of being homelessness. I think they're showing them the resiliency and showing them after they've been placed in their own apartment and showing the joy on their face. And that really, I think, makes the donor understand all the work that the organization and the person did to get where they are. So I tend to lean toward the positive in the work that I've done. Yeah.
What are the most common mistakes that organization probably should have caught in before they sent it out to print? But they sent it out to print anyway, and then off it goes. What are some of the most common mistakes they probably should have caught in that last little check before it went out? Maybe even earlier, but like, what do you see in appeals that you're like, that make you cringe as someone who is a marketer on this?
I mean, typos are always bad. So you never want to have typos. You always want to have proofreading, multiple proofreaders. I guess probably the biggest glitch is maybe like a URL that doesn't work. So like a bad link is always a problem, or a QR code that doesn't scan right. You want to make sure your call to action is good, but then if it's strong and then and you can't actually follow through and click on the link, or the link's wrong.
You got to scan it with your phone before that goes out the door.
Got to test everything. Yeah, you do. You test and you retest and you proof and you reproof. So yeah, it takes a lot of work. It really does. A lot of checks and balances to make sure that end to end, it's going to work the way you intend it to work. Yeah.
Just for fun, what is the weirdest thing that you've seen go out that was like, I didn't know it was possible to make a mistake in that way? I'm thinking, like, I don't know, an organization tried to send out an appeal and they forgot to include an image, but they had a placeholder for the image.
Yeah, right.
So somebody just gets a placeholder in their mailbox.
I know.
Like, what is the funniest thing that you've seen in that?
I don't know if I can tell you like anything that's been too crazy. I think when it comes to direct mail, I don't think I've seen anything crazier than probably like a QR code that didn't work, or a bad URL, or a typo.
Okay.
But in email solicitations, I think we've all seen, crazy things, like you said, an image that doesn't come through, or the format is just wrong.
I had one where I sent an email and the title of it was My Company. That was who it was from. My Company. Yes.
Yeah. Or you see dear first name, and the person's first name is not there. So yeah.
Right.
That's a big one. Yeah. I think we've all seen one of those. Yeah. People forget to take the standard, take the, what's inserted and customize themselves. Yeah.
So when it goes from direct mail to email, what are some of the differences in how you approach the process with email as opposed to direct mail as it relates to what we're talking about?
Yeah, email is a whole different ball of wax. So a lot of times with email, it's going to be strategically, more abbreviated than direct mail letters. Like I said, it's going to be a whole page front and back. Email is not going to be that long. You're going to take just certain elements of it, and you're going to want to just drive traffic to your website. That's the intention of the email, is to garner the interest, drive traffic to that full story on your website, drive traffic to your donor page. So you really want to use email with a lot of links that are going to get people over to your website to take action, either to read more or to take action. So yeah, the email is maybe the story is going to start. You're going to start to tell the story in the email to get people's attention, but then you're going to want to have them continue over to your website to read the full story, to make the donation, to
Mm.
call you for more information or whatever the call to action is. Yeah.
What do you find is changing in the email space and that used to work but doesn't work anymore?
No, I still think email is really, it's the most affordable. You get the best return on your investment. So I still am a big proponent of email, and I always have been. So I don't really think there's a downside. I think the only problem is people's email boxes are really cluttered. So it's getting that open rate. So again, it's, do they know who you are? Do they know your name? Like, say the email should come from an individual's name.
So
So
not like from
not from Next Level Nonprofits, but from Dan Johnson,
Okay.
and, or it could be both. It could be Dan Johnson / Next Level Nonprofit. That's what I do. I do Jocelyn Murray, and then I do / and my business name. So then if someone knows me personally, they're going to see that. If they know my business name, great, they're going to see that. But you want to make sure that the recipient knows who you are. They don't know you, they're not going to open that email. So that's tough. I think with email, cold solicitation is really frowned upon. You want to build that donor list of people who have some connection, who've signed up for your email list, who've attended your event, who are also a member of an association like you are. Maybe they're a member of your local chamber like you are. So you have a connection. A lot of my nonprofits, they want to purchase lists, but that's just not the way to do it, because first of all, it's considered spam, and second of all, you don't have that personal connection, so you're not likely to get it opened. You're not like, so it's very futile. It's kind of a waste of time. So I guess that's probably the biggest challenge, is building your list and making sure it's a good list of people that have some connection to your organization. That's probably the biggest challenge, but email is really a great tool. It complements direct mail, and even if you cannot afford direct mail, in and of itself is a great method to communicate with your donors.
So I kind of want to take on two things inside email. Number one, how do you write a subject line that'll get them to actually open it, right? And number two is I forget, so we'll start with that one.
Yeah, I would say personalization is one of the biggest things. Using the individual's first name in the subject line it's really shown to help your open rate. So a lot of times if I see my name in that subject line, that means they took the time. They know why. It makes you feel like the organization knows who you are. So I'd say personalization is really important for email. I think in general, you want to get the most mileage from your stories. Stories can be evergreen. So, consider all the time that you're putting into telling your stories. So how can you use this content, to the maximum effect?
Over and over and over again.
Yeah, how can you get the most mileage out of it? So again, like I said, you want to make sure you have all your stories on your website. You're going to want to be sharing links to these stories in your emails, in your newsletter. Are you doing a newsletter? You should absolutely be doing a newsletter, including like one story per newsletter, or the beginning of the story and then link over to your website so readers can read the entire story. And although you get tired of it, your donors, your prospects, they don't get tired of it, because a lot of them have not read it before. We think everybody knows everything that we know, and they don't. So it's okay to repeat the stories. It's okay if you say, oh, we included this, 7 months ago, we included this in an email. It's okay to resend, because a lot of people didn't see it. So it's great to repeat it, because a lot of times we think things are stale, but in our minds they are, but they're really not in the minds and the eyes of the prospect or the donor. Same with social media. You want to make sure you're sharing all your stories and especially with the visuals as social media content, and provide you with a great content stream. And again, it also will help bring people to your website, which is really important too. So I think repurposing and getting the most mileage from your stories is something that you don't want to overlook, because you're going to invest a lot of time and money in creating the stories. So continue to use them. Continue to use them in every method that you can, even at your events. A lot of times people will have handouts at their events, where they can include a printed profile of this, the story, with the image, and it could be like a front and back story, a one pager. I have a lot of nonprofits that do that at their events. So
that's really smart. Yeah, because then someone can actually, I'm thinking even like if a nonprofit were going to table at a farmer's market or whatever, and they could actually provide the story on a rack card to somebody who could actually read it instead of it just being like, this nonprofit helps people. This is someone who was actually helped by us.
Right. Yeah. So
that's amazing.
Leverage them as much as you can, and keep the message out there in all mediums.
I think leverage it as much as you can and keep the message out there is probably the point that we will wrap this up on. Jocelyn, thank you so much for coming on our Friday Expert live stream. Everyone, thanks for tuning in. And next week, we will have a good friend of mine, Sarah Orlana, on to talk about program design. Specifically, how do you create a needs assessment that isn't going to cost you $1 million? What do you need to do to figure out what the needs of your community and the needs of your people are in a quick and easy fashion? That is what Sarah will be talking about next Friday. Jocelyn's email is, again, jocelynem@marketing-er.com. I'm going to pull it back up on the screen. If you want her storytelling tips for nonprofits, email Jocelyn at marketing-er. Just say that you heard it on the Next Level Friday live stream, and she will get you all set up. Jocelyn, thanks so much for coming on the show. We'll debrief in a second. Everyone, thanks so much for listening. I will see you next week, Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern.